Good afternoon.
Hey, good afternoon.
Hi, today is Friday, August the 2nd. This is the Engineering Committee's teleconference meeting that we have set up in order to work on definitions. It's part of the Definitions Committee agenda and plan, and so we created a special meeting for the engineers to have an opportunity to talk and go through these, and it's been properly noticed on the board's website. We provided more than the 48-hour notice. We are recording so that this can be posted, but at this moment, it is just myself in the room, and this is Roxana Gamusia, the Executive Director with the Architects and Engineers. We have participating telephonically three engineer board members, Ms. Kathy Ware, Mr. Stephen King, and Mr. Robert Campbell Jr., and then Attorney Stuart Huffman is also joining us by phone. So I will go ahead and turn the meeting all over to Kathy. And if for some reason we can't make out who's speaking, I may have to ask you to give your name as you're going forward. But it's all yours, Ms. Ware. Thank you.
Thank you, Roxana. We appreciate it. So I just want to make sure that everybody has three documents for this discussion. And Robert, if you're riding along on the road and you can't get to them, we can kind of talk through them. Are you going to be stopping along the way?
Yeah, I'm 5 minutes from the office, so I'll have them in front of me here in just a few.
Okay, all right, that's cool. So there's basically three documents that everybody should have. One is a engineering definition, is the title at the top, and that is a 2-page document that is a Word document that includes the Florida definition and the Texas definition that I introduced at our last meeting relative to something that I thought was a good starting point. So those are the two definitions with just a little bit of wordsmithing to make it more readable by me, but basically no meaningful changes, which if you were to look at it, the first page going all the way to the bottom where you begin to read a new paragraph that says the practice of engineering, and that's the start of the Texas version. So the Florida version at the top, Texas version at the bottom. And again, all that is just a Word document that I put together so that we had something to talk about, even though I didn't introduce it last meeting. And then the other two documents were provided by Steve, and thank you, Steve, for doing that. Just, again, so we had it in front of us for reference purposes, is the practice of surveying as defined by NCWS model law, and the practice of engineering as defined by NCWS model law. So those are just for reference documents in case we want to include anything or talk about something in particular relative to those two documents, and recognizing that that's kind of the starting point for most state laws when they start working on that, even if it's just for the purpose of discussion. So it's not something that we're trying to adopt that document in particular, so much as that it just gives us another talking point to discuss. So having said that, I'm really just open to a free will conversation on this, and in anticipation that we'll have more conversation next week. But this is a conversation that probably deserves more than just 20 to 30 minutes, and it seems like every time we had an engineering committee meeting for the past few months or so, we ran out of time. And so my purpose in setting up this meeting, and again, thank you to Steve and Robert for participating, my purpose in setting up the meeting was just to give us a little bit more time to flesh out some of the issues we thought were most important, to talk about any specifics of let's definitely include this, let's definitely not include that, just to try to work through the discussions that we need to have so that we can start narrowing the verbiage down to something that we're going to feel more comfortable with. So again, today's objective is not to end up with something that we'll vote on next week, but hopefully we can bring something to the table next week when we meet at our regularly scheduled engineering committee meeting prior to the board meeting with a little bit more refinement. So that's my hope. So having said that, Steve, since Robert's en route, would you like to offer opinions, suggestions, just any kind of start our conversation off?
Well, let me start out by saying to Robert what I've already told the rest of y'all before Robert got on the phone was Robert, I felt like that Frank was questioning sort of why we didn't recommend the NCAAS version, since the other, the architects and landscape architects were using their equivalent organization version of definition of their practice. So I sort of felt like that ought to be something that he could see, that all these definitions really start out with the NCAAS definition, and all of them are modified to some degree. And I'm not suggesting we not modify it. I just thought it ought to be there so others on the committee could see it.
No, I think that's good. I appreciate you sending both of those because I think every one of these definitions seems to come from the same mom and daddy somewhere, right? I mean, they're all kind of the same.
I think everybody starts with NCAAS and adds particular things that they're concerned about in their state.
Yeah, I would agree.
So in looking through like you said, the general practice of engineering as defined by both Florida and Texas, they kind of start off with a generic definition and then get into more detail. So the Texas definition in particular enumerates, explicitly the following things are defined as engineering services. The Florida definition says the terms generally mean the adequate performance, service or creative work, the adequate performance of which requires blah, 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 blah. And then it gets a little bit more specific, but it doesn't enumerate anything. And I'm not hung up on one particular format or the other, but I'm curious as to whether or not you all think we should go with something that is more bulleted, enumerated, or general paragraph verbiage. Do y'all have an opinion?
Can you hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay, good. I'm back at the office now. I vacillate on that a little bit. There's a part of me that says you ought to have it in like 3 sentences and be done with it and leave the rest of it for some legal case sometime. That's kind of how we did with the drainage part of the surveyor part. But then there's another thing that says that some of these things that we're having difficulty with, we should probably include more specifics on those. So I go back and forth, and I'm not giving you a good answer.
Well, I think I could be okay with it either way. There might be an argument that can be made to have the 3 definitions to be in a similar form. So if I don't think the others suggested a bullet point kind of definition, so maybe we all ought to do it.
Well, I went back and looked at the other 3, Steve, because I wondered about that myself. And the other 3 disciplines are very, very different one from the other. Susan's is a very short 1 paragraph kind of a thing. Yeah. Language that I would say is probably a little less technical than the other disciplines. And then the architects and the landscape architects are different from one another also. So I don't think we're really going to be able to, because I had hoped that just in my incredibly symmetrically aligned brain, I had hoped we would have, a very standardized template of how the definitions were created but I don't think that's going to happen. So I don't think we need to worry about fitting in with somebody else's format. I think there's some real benefit to enumerating some things that are explicitly considered engineering. And I'll say, straight up, for instance, one of the things that I've actually heard in the marketplace, y'all know what KS Ware does for a living is geotechnical and environmental work. And I've actually heard in the marketplace sometimes that people say, well, geotechnical engineering isn't real engineering. Well, I don't know why they think that, but sometimes there is value in enumerating some things for the purpose of just eliminating right off the bat. We're not even going to argue whether or not that is or is not by interpretation. Let's just flat out say the following things are, by definition, engineering.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is some value in doing that, and then also having some paragraphs that are that could be used, as Robert says, down the road when there are cases and lawsuits and interpretations and amendments, et cetera, to provide guidance on including things or excluding things eventually, one way or the other. And that's just my opinion.
I don't feel real strongly either way, so I don't mind that. Tell me again, Kathy, where does Texas start out on the sheet after Florida?
Okay, so if you're looking at it as a 2-page document,
yeah,
the top starts with the Florida definition,
right,
and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, and then you have a new paragraph that says the practice of engineering means
okay,
the performance or an offer. That's the beginning of the Texas definition.
Okay, that's what I thought.
This might be more of a legal question than a engineering committee discussion. But there's a paragraph in the Florida one that talks about a person who practices any branch of engineering by verbal claim, sign, advertisement, letterhead, or card, and then it goes on to say blah, 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 or other title implies that he or she is an engineer. So I was wondering if we even needed to include that, since we have a lot more stuff in our law as a title act. Do we need to restate that? If a person is doing engineering, then or by virtue of some other title implies that they are an engineer, do we even need that paragraph, or would we be running the risk of contradicting ourselves?
Contradicting, yeah.
Yeah, I think we're contradicting them, but I think you need to have that verbiage in there.
Even if it's somewhere else, I think that's Kathy's point. If because it's a title act, maybe it's on a different part of the statute addressed.
Right.
Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, I mean, it should be in there. I can't tell you where it is right now, but I still think you should have that verbiage.
I think.
You think we should have it in there again?
Twice?
Well, I can't really tell you like if it's actually in there already. I'd have to look. I mean, it is a title act, but I would think we would have to go ahead and include it right now, and then I can look and see if it's somewhere else, and then we can take it out.
I think
So
Florida did a good job of describing that.
Yeah. Roxana, can you bring that to his attention?
Oh, absolutely.
With regard to it's paragraph number 3.
Yes, I've got it. I've got it right in front of me. I'm going to highlight it. That way Stuart has a chance to look at it, because I get your point. If it's already listed somewhere else, having it twice defined in one place and then somewhere else telling us how this applies could be confusing or redundant at minimum.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
we don't know.
yeah.
I don't know if Florida has that verbiage already, and if they're maybe contradicting or saying it twice. So we'd have to look at our statutes first.
Okay. Well, let's just make sure that we do that. I certainly don't want to repeat anything that's already in the act that is well done or provides any conflict. So we'll just make a note of that Roxana will get with Stuart to review paragraph number 3 for conflicts and whether or not it needs to be in there at all, not in its current state, but as a part of the definition section of the law.
Perfect.
The next paragraph down from that is number 4. The number 4 paragraph, Robert, specifically, we had talked about the fact that we wanted to highlight the 3-legged stool.
Yeah.
So I did kind of take a little bit of literary license and add that in. And I, of course, can't call it that, but I added in a paragraph about only registrants who are qualified to provide such services or creative work may do so. And then I added the qualifications are based equally on the 3 foundational requirements in the areas of education, experience, and examination. Is that going to address what you wanted to see, or is there more to it?
No, I think that looks good. I think that also that was part of it, but the other part of it was, and maybe we're doing this for the definition, is how we address things that require a request for qualification versus those things that do not, because they're not real engineering services. Where you run into, say, for instance, this is a classic one. We have a transportation planning organization saying they just want planning services, but then they kind of come back and say, oh, but we want signal analysis, and we want some traffic analysis work and all that, which is clearly engineering. And again, maybe the definition takes care of that, Kathy, but I like what you put in.
Well, so I thought that was interesting as the way that Texas, I think, tried to address that. If you look at number 12, so number 12, I think, is their attempt to try to address that situation. Any other professional service necessary for the planning, progress, or completion of an engineering service.
Yeah, and I think that should probably say professional engineering service. If we're defining engineering, I saw that, but
well, at the beginning of the definition, I tried to make sure that we say engineering includes professional engineering, and the terms can be used interchangeably and mean the same thing.
Yeah, but this just says service. Well, I reckon it says service. Okay.
So I can add that in there. So any other professional engineering service.
It's not we're just talking about it.
I'm sorry, one more time?
So we're just talking about it right now. So, I mean, that's just a
well, yeah, but I mean, I wanted to see if you kind of thought maybe that would help relative, because that is an underlying theme that we've talked about a lot, the fact that certain services that are requested or that might be provided by registrants are sometimes overlapping with what we know to be engineering services. You know, we talked a long time about environmental, and I was, kind of trying to weigh in there that there's a lot of environmental services. And so if you are a PE and you sign an environmental report, does that mean that you should seal it even though the service itself may or may not fall under the definition of quote-unquote engineering? I mean, these are the kind of things that we're trying to solve some of that right now, are we not?
Yeah, and I think that we probably ought to make some provision to, maybe that's how, I don't know, that engineering service means that you, of course, then you're going to get into people that are not professional engineers necessarily, but still, well, I reckon you're not going to have, well, never mind. Yeah, I'm thinking about somebody that's a mechanical engineer in a factory would still be practicing engineering in my world, but they would not be considered a professional. So, does that make sense?
You mean because of the industrial exemption?
Yeah, I mean, they're still practicing engineering. I suppose part of this is there's the practice of engineering, or the definition of engineering, then there's professional engineering, and I know we're kind of trying to get both of them together, but we can almost put so many things, so many caveats, I think is the right word, that we make it, I don't know what, I'm just thinking, I'm thinking about my early career, what I was called a manufacturing engineer. And some of the things I did were really engineering stuff. I mean, they were collecting data, analyzing stuff, coming up with solutions, developing. But I wasn't a professional engineer, obviously, but it was engineering.
Mm.
So I don't know. I'm trying to think how we deal with that as well.
Well, I think that might be let's try to put that on the parking lot issues if we can for right now, so that we don't just get too twisted around that particular issue. I do want to come back to it, and I think it's very, very important that we at least acknowledge it as an issue that we need to make a decision on. Are we going to try to do that, or are we just going to wait and that'll just have to be done by others at some distant point? One of the things I really want to try to avoid is getting too down in the weeds to the point where we can't agree on anything, and therefore we aren't able to get a definition done. And there's no doubt that this thing is going to have to be refined over the next several decades, in my opinion.
Well, and I agree with you, but my point, I think, was this. Not trying to work for the industrial exemption at all, but if you have a definition of engineering, also looking maybe at a legal standpoint, and you walk into a court of law and somebody says, you were practicing engineering, and we don't have it, and it's not in our definition, or we've excluded it just to professional engineers, how solid is our definition legally? You know, somebody that's designing the Mars rover craft is probably doing engineering, and if somehow they were, you're not an engineer, or you're not a professional engineer. I know I'm not making any sense, but I'm trying to. I don't want the definition to be made invalid because we don't recognize that all engineers are not necessarily professional engineers.
Well, I would think that, engineering is engineering, whether our law requires that individual to be licensed. It's the same thing with electric co-ops. You go out and build a electrical substation as long as you do it for your utility and not have to be licensed, but it's still engineering.
Yes.
That may be a legal question. Maybe a legal question for Stuart, but I would think we could define engineering and still have exemptions in our law. We're just saying, it's still engineering. Just for whatever reason, the legislature has decided, well, we're individuals practicing engineering for these type companies or electric co-ops or utilities, the rules don't apply. But that's really what we're saying, isn't it?
Well, it also goes back to what we highlighted about the verbiage. Anybody that holds himself out to be an engineer, even though they're not licensed, but they can still be an engineer.
Well, Robert, do you feel like the introductory paragraph at least provides a little bit of a foundation there for the performance of things that would be engineering? When you start with the phrase, and it comes straight off the model law, the term means any service or creative work, the adequate performance of which requires engineering education, training, and experience in the application of special knowledge of the mathematical, physical, and engineering sciences. Do you think that that's enough of a starting point to help with what you're concerned about?
No, I do. I think where we're on the right path. I agree with what you've got in here. It looks good. We kind of then take the definition from that point to, and I probably started some of it about, only those registrants. And maybe because it's registrant, that qualifies it to where it doesn't matter. But I just hate to call it a definition of engineering and then equate it to professional engineering, because I wonder if we're not on shaky ground when somebody challenges that and say, I'm an engineer. And maybe it's not. Maybe I'm making something up here. Like the guy out in Oregon, right? I mean, he was an engineer, had a lot of experience, but he wasn't a professional engineer. I don't know. I like the way you start. I mean, I'm fine with that. But then we kind of go down the professional engineer thing.
Well, maybe we need to get Stuart to help us to best craft a definition section that is inclusive enough of the professional engineering title so that there's no wiggle room for saying I'm an engineer but not a professional engineer, so none of this applies to me.
Well,
is that what we're trying? Is that
maybe
what
the
we're
thing
trying
to do is just go ahead and write it like we think, and I'm sure it's going to go through a pretty thorough legal review, comparing, looking at all those issues Robert's bringing up.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it will. And like some states, they define professional engineering, and then in some states they go to the practice of engineering, which includes engineering and professional engineering.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a best way of doing it for the state of Tennessee, Stuart?
I don't know.
That's fine. That's fine.
Well, I mean,
we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get there. But like Utah, it says professional engineering, the practice of engineering, or the practice of professional engineering means a service or creative work, the adequate performance of which requires engineering, education, training, and experience in the application of special knowledge. And then it gets into the mathematical, physical, engineering sciences. So they kind of put it all in there.
All right, well, I'm making a note of that. I think that's probably something that we want to address at the very top. So we'll try to figure that out. Right off the top of my head, I'm just thinking that where I started with engineering includes the term professional engineering, I'm thinking just add engineering includes the term professional engineering, the practice of engineering, and the practice of professional engineering by registrants.
That may be a very good point, Kathy, just what you said right now, by registrants, because on our last round of rules that we had before the legislators in some of my meetings and questions, and I don't remember, one of the representatives or senators is an engineer by degree from a university. And so whatever terminology at the time we had in those rules in the pipeline, that maybe the ones that now we're almost done, that we had to come back and clean up a little bit, that's what threw them off, is I am an engineer. What do you mean? Why this additional definition? And so I think adding something along the lines of the extra piece to register and be licensed and be that professional, getting it right up front may be the best place to get it.
Okay. Well, I just made a note of it. With this, again, this is just continuing. We're just going to refine from here. So
Yeah.
We'll have this on Wednesday next week. We'll have the document that we started with this morning or this afternoon, and then I'm going to make some more changes to it based on all the stuff we talk about. And then, so we'll have that also, and then we'll just have a an ongoing sequence of documents that, as we make changes and refinements to kind of remember, hopefully remember. That's one of my challenges as why it is that we've made certain changes. But I'm going to do that for a starting point. And then let's switch horses and just do this. Let's go to the second page of this 2-page document, which is the enumeration of what Texas said the practice of engineering hereby explicitly includes the following. And I want to go to this because I want to see if we agree that any of these should be taken out and not included in our law, or that we agree, even if it's not the way we want to include it, do we think that all of these things are indeed part of engineering for the state of Tennessee? So I'm just going to start with number 1, and y'all can read it in front of you. But consultation, investigation, evaluation, analysis, planning, engineering for program management, comma, providing an expert witness or opinion, comma, engineering for testing and evaluating materials for construction or other engineering use, comma, and mapping. That's a pretty long number 1 to begin with. But I think it could be broken into a couple more lines if you wanted to. You could stop at program management, and that could be a line, and then expert witness or opinion could be another line, and then engineering for testing and evaluation of materials for construction or other engineering use could be another line, and then mapping is included. So before we go any farther, those 4 things that are included there, is there debate as to whether or not all or any of those 4 should not be on the list?
Let me weigh in with one, I think, fairly easy one. I think when we say mapping, I think what the NCAAS part of it is makes some sense maybe to put in parentheses to not include boundary surveys or something. See, I'm saying that right, I think, is that it doesn't include land boundaries. Because I don't want to get in a fight with the surveyors who think that mapping is about.
And that's part of the reason I wanted to throw out the NCAAS definitions, because if you look at both of them related to surveying, it's pretty clear what engineers can't do.
Yeah.
And I think we want to keep that balance with our definition and the surveyor's definition.
So if we were to take out mapping altogether, just for right now, just assume that mapping went away at the end of number 1, but we did include instead surveying incidental to the practice of engineering.
Yes, ma'am.
Period. But which excludes the surveying of real property for the establishment of land boundaries, rights of way, easements, dependent, blah 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 blah. Yeah. And that was one of the enumerated items.
Yes. I think so. Yeah.
What you could do is just use the exact language out of the NCAAS for one of the enumerated items.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, that's what I was reading.
Where it says survey. Yeah. Okay. I think
the only thing I added to it was the but which, because it just doesn't fit our format. But yes, the exact same language.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Yay.
I think I'm good with taking mapping off. What do you think, Robert?
No, I agree. That's what we're trying to do. Take mapping off and then just add another
and add that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a lot more clear, I think.
Okay.
Good. I'm with that too. I think mapping is too generic for my taste.
The only other one that I've got questions on and are engineering for program management. I don't know what that will do, but I don't know what that looks like.
I wonder what the background for explaining it like that is.
I mean, is it a very detailed Gantt chart that you use? Is it and I'll admit this is one I struggle with when it comes to program management. Maybe only because I only consider about 10% of it engineering, the rest of it management.
I don't know. I'll have to give some thought to that too, because
It
know
must
that
mean
program-
something because they capitalized it.
yeah,
Specific.
I think
to that.
I agree. I think it means something very specific that we don't want to leave to the imagination to be assumed by other people, because otherwise, we haven't done a very good job of defining something. So why don't we? I'm going to put that.
We turned a lot of applicants down for just having program management. Okay.
Okay. How about providing expert witness or opinion?
I definitely want that in there.
Okay. And how about engineering for testing and evaluating materials for construction or other engineering use?
Yeah, I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So then we took out mapping, and we're going to replace it with the surveying incidental to the practice of engineering. So on number 2, conceptual design coordination of engineering works or systems. Thumbs up or down?
Fine with me.
Yep. Might even use that term engineering works or system up there and for program.
For the program management?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was thinking and this not necessarily the same thing, but when we're doing job descriptions here for more senior level staff engineers, we talk about so many years of experience on a project or a program. Like in Robert, in my world here, we would call our whole stormwater quality work engineering, but we call it a program rather than a project. Where we take one of Tom's Claybo's design projects, that's a project.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's what
Yeah.
they're getting at, but that would be another way to do it. Just talk about programs and projects rather than program management.
Okay. That's a good thought. I like that.
That's something to think about.
Yeah, they use the works or systems phrase a lot.
Yeah.
And I haven't done enough background research to understand why they use that phrase necessarily, but I do kind of like it. I mean, it does.
Yeah, and I'm good with that too.
It's
I feel
broader
like
than just saying a project, and it's broader
Right.
than just saying construction.
And it's broader than just saying program management, which.
Right.
Yeah.
It could be interpreted to be a whole lot of things.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Development or optimization of plans and specs for engineering works or systems. Thumbs up, thumbs down?
I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
I kind of like the fact that it has or optimization in it, because I've seen things where non-engineers want to pick up a set of plans and specs and start making changes and then say, well, I'm not doing engineering. I'm just improving. I'm just making some value improvements on what you've done.
Yeah.
No, you're trying to do engineering.
Yeah. We had one just recently. Someone tried to do that with somebody's design and modify it and get a permit.
Yeah,
Fortunately,
absolutely.
we caught them.
All righty, so 2 is good, 3 is good, 4 is planning the use of or alteration of land and water, or the design or analysis of works or systems for the use or alteration of land or water. Thumbs up, thumbs down?
Yeah, I'm
okay with that.
Do we also need to include What about the air component of that?
Alteration of air, land, or
Well,
water.
I don't tell, do we do that or not? But I mean, that's you've got people that do, that do like these scrubbers and
yeah.
people that do a lot of what's that called when you're trying to get in compliance? They do modeling of
When
pollution.
you're trying to meet air quality standards, or
yeah, and I think a lot of that's got some pretty good engineering science behind it.
yeah.
Well, I tell you what, if you're doing Clean Air Act compliant stuff, that is absolutely engineering, no doubt about it.
That's what I think too. I just think, put the air in there, Kathy. I think it's that's a part of it.
Okay. Responsible charge of engineering teaching or the teaching of engineering. I mean, basically, this is saying that if you're teaching engineering, you got to have a license. There's a whole lot of people who aren't going to want to do that.
Absolutely.
But it's still engineering, whether they want to do it or not. But this is Texas, so they gave them the out. If they gave an engineering school the out that if you don't want all your professors to be PEs, you just have to put them under the responsible charge of someone that is.
That's right.
And
so that would mean like the dean or the chair
or the department. Yeah. Interestingly enough, when I was TSPE president a long time ago, I suggested that to the engineering schools that they fill out a disclosure form just like a consultant does, and actually show who's in responsible charge. But I didn't get anywhere with it. That was a good idea.
It was a great idea, but nobody wanted to do it.
That's right.
No, I agree with you.
That's something that always baffled me. That's one of the things that our current law specifically says is engineering, because we give you experience if you teach engineering at a 4-year school, but we don't make you be licensed if you teach engineering at a 4-year school.
Yeah.
I agree.
I think let's just leave it in there for now. We can always debate it a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I don't think I want to strike it at this particular point, primarily because it provides for the out because it's responsible charge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there'll be some opposition to that.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
All right, number 7 is performing an engineering survey or study.
Do we still need that if we add the surveying incidental part?
Well, we don't need the survey part, but the way I would read this is performing a study which requires engineering elements, which requires engineering expertise or engineering something.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're going to have more to this than if we're going to leave this kind of if we're leaving this phrase in there, the phrase is going to have to be more well refined because lots of things could be considered a study and a lot of people are going to say, no, that's not a study. So maybe since we have number 1, if you expand number 1 to be consultation, investigation, evaluation, analysis, planning, and or engineering for engineering works or systems, then maybe that eliminates the need for number 6. Because I don't know how you could perform an engineering study without doing some facet which is alluded to in number 1.
Well, what if somebody wants a master plan of a let's say a greenway system for a city or a county? Most people probably would say that's not engineering, but there's definitely engineering involved in it. That's what you're kind of getting at, isn't it, Robert?
It is, yes, sir. Yeah. I think I like Kathy. I think we could take out the word survey, but performing a study of engineering also or something defined in the room.
Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
So it would be performing a study which has engineering elements as defined in number 1 above.
Okay. Okay. I'll try to get that in there, and then we can talk about it some more on Wednesday.
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So number 7, engineering for construction, alteration, or repair of real property. I think that's an easy one.
Okay.
My only concern here is I hate using the word engineering to define what the word engineering is. The design of modifications to, or is there a better, again, just bad English. I just always remember being told in elementary school, you can't define a word by using the word itself. I think that teacher had eyeglasses. I can't remember. Can you use the word to help define the word itself?
But you could do kind of the same thing there on the next 2 if you want to. You can say construction, alterations, or repair of real property using the items in number 1 or something. Because you're kind of really defining engineer.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, construction, alterations, repair of real property. With I like the way that's put. I mean, but I understand what you're saying too. We need to have those elements in there.
Yeah. Let me work on that. I think 7, 8, and 9 could use just a little bit of modification of the way the concept is presented. But I definitely want to refer back to, like you said, elements that are previously defined in number 1. I really like that. So review of the construction of or installation of engineered works to monitor compliance with drawings and specs. That's a given, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Can we talk about number 8 just a little bit, and maybe it just needs to be expanded? Are all operations and maintenance manuals, would they be considered engineering? I'm trying to think if that's accurate or not. Maybe that needs to be off for engineered systems or something. Maybe that's...
Yeah.
Or engineering works or systems to be consistent with the above?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay.
My lawnmower probably was written by an engineer, but, you know, it may have been a technical writer, too.
I've written a lot of those things over my career, and I would say this is some of the most demanding technical work I've ever done to get that stuff right. So, all right. So, thank you for that feedback on that one, and we'll work on getting that one modified. How about number 9, though? Are you good with that? Again, I'm going to modify 7, 8, and 9 to reference some of the other things we've already talked about.
Yeah.
How about the number 10? I'm struggling with number 10. You guys need to help me on number 10. It's just so long. I got to go get a charger. My phone's about to die. So if I lose you, I'll call back in. But y'all
What
can
do
talk
we have
about
on number-
it while
we
I'm
have
gone.
something in our law on this, where we have the exemption about the, things more than 3 stories. Did that say? Let's see.
You there, Robert?
I'm here.
Okay.
I'm trying to look something up.
Okay. Sorry.
I thought I lost everybody there.
I did too. That's why I piped in.
I'm here. I was trying to find the. Let's see. Yeah, I can't find it right now. That may not be that big of a deal. May not be that big of a deal. Never mind right now. We can keep going when Kathy's able to get back.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Y'all decide anything meaningful while I was gone?
What were you looking for, Robert? The story exemption?
Yeah. I thought we had some similar language in that, but maybe we don't.
Do what?
Well, we say what is requiring a.
Are you on number 10?
I think
Yeah.
what you're looking for is 62-2-102,
Mm-hmm.
where it gives you the practice and persons exempt from registration. And it's under paragraph B1.
And that may be just for, let's see here. Yeah, okay.
Do we need to leave number 10 in or not?
Yeah, there was some language in there that kind of reminded me of that for some reason, and I may just be, maybe late in the week and late in the day, so don't worry about it. No, we're good. Let's leave that in. Leave that in.
Just leave it in exactly the way it is.
Yeah.
Steve, you agree?
Yes. But why does that one have an or at the end of it?
I don't know.
11 ends the same way with an or for some reason.
Which one?
11
11.
or any other. But 10 shouldn't. At least I can't think of why it would.
I don't know. I have to go back and pull out the actual law itself and look at it and see what it says. Oh, I think, if I remember correctly, I will go back and confirm this, but I think that number 11 was actually the end of their numbers.
Oh.
So
Okay.
number 10 said or and had 11. And then 12 was a new paragraph. And I think I just made I think I made a mistake when I was trying to format it. Because I actually had to retype this stuff and, do OCR on it. So I think I messed that up. That's probably where that came from. And then they have an actual law requiring a certificate of merit before you can go and file suit against somebody. So number 11 is probably going to come out of ours because we don't have that particular law.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. 11 didn't look like it applied to us.
Yeah, because they made reference to, chapter, blah, 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 in their law. And we don't have anything that even remotely comes close to that. Is that true? we don't have a certificate of merit requirement for a lawsuit or anything.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I'm gonna take number 11.
I don't think so. I don't know.
Okay, I'm pretty sure we don't, but I left it in there just because, again, I was trying to be consistent and just include everything that they had.
Mm.
And then their last paragraph was any other professional service, and I added the word engineering, professional engineering service necessary for the planning, progress, or completion of an engineering service. And that kind of speaks to your issue, Robert, of, don't tell me you want just a master plan when it requires signalization, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So you like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, did you have something else, Kathy? I was going to bring up two things.
Yeah, by all means. Let me just say that with regard to this, before you say anything else, is just so that was one of the reasons why I did like the Texas law, because it had so many things that explicitly said, and it includes this, and it includes this, and it includes this, because there's always room for interpretation if you go purely on the basis of descriptive narrative paragraphs. And, if we say we don't want numbers 1 through 12 or any version thereof, and we don't want to say explicitly all this stuff, that's fine. But I liked that because, again, I like the fact that we don't have to argue over whether or not certain things constitute engineering. And we don't have to wait forever for interpretations to be made and for case law to be established on it. So that was one of the reasons why, again, I took two states that I liked both of them and brought elements of both to the table. There's paragraphs at the beginning of Texas and Florida which are similar, and it kind of depends on how wordy we want to be, but we could include a lot of what's in the Florida law and do all the 1 through 12 stuff, or we can eliminate some of the paragraphs or wordsmith or shorten some of the paragraphs in the Florida and include most of what's in the numbers for Texas. I'm just here to facilitate what we think as a group we want to do. So, having said that, I need feedback from you, but we can move on to other topics of conversation.
Well, and that's sort of along the lines of what I wanted to bring up. We still have the incidental practice thing to deal with between the practices. And we also, there's a advantage for us to be specific like the 1 through 12 is, but, if you're an architect or a landscape architect, you're probably going to read down through there and say, well, some of that could be architecture. So how do we deal with that when they bring that up?
Well, I think there's going to be some overlap.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a way to write these things without there being some level of overlap. When we talk about the paragraph that we were going to use for incidental survey, we could offer up to the architects that they can write the paragraph then also for us to compare what we think and what they think with regard to the incidental practice of architecture, to put it in here, because we'll want them to include something that, narrowly defines the incidental practice of engineering in the law. Is that a fair statement?
I think, here's what I think we ought to do. We ought to just acknowledge that that's going to be out there and just say, hey, we acknowledge that some of these items may be considered other professions. And other professions will say that, and I'm going to say this messed up, but other professions will say they can do these items based on experience or training. But isn't that what we say? I mean, and maybe we just say that we recognize that some other professionals may be able to perform a partial, some subset of these items based on their education, experience, and training, or something, and go on.
Right. Well, I'm not sure how we word it, but I think how it needs to function is that's sort of left up to the, kind of like we do it right now. It's left up to the board. If a registrant of the board can practice an overlap, a gray area between the professions, and the board thinks the registrant's qualified, then that's okay. I'm not as much worried about that as, I guess it was some of the architects that are concerned about that. But we've got, the board has control of that.
I agree. I mean, right now it's at the board's discretion as to whether or not they think that someone is overstepping their qualifications on the basis of experience and training, et cetera.
But do we call that out anywhere, guys? If the board has jurisdiction over that?
No, I mean, you mean in this proposed definition? No.
Anywhere. I mean, is it in the law anywhere? I mean, it probably is, but does it say?
I don't think it is, because we don't define anything right now, so there's no reason to talk about incidentals.
Yeah, I don't think that incidental is defined at all. I would suggest that, why don't I draft up some kind of a sentence, a starting point, that could be a reciprocal sentence, that we interchange the words engineering and architecture, and suggest, if we agree that we like it and we think it would be good law and helpful to registrants to know what's allowed, and then we suggest to the architects that here's something you could use that we would find acceptable if the words were interchanged, and instead of incidental engineering, instead of incidental architecture practice, the words could be interchanged. Why don't I just take a stab at it, and then we can go from there and have more discussion on Wednesday?
Okay.
Because I think they're going to have more heartburn with it than we are. But if we can help them to see that we're trying to do something that's mutually beneficial, and still keeps people from wondering whether or not they're crossing the line, then maybe we can get something done.
I'll just look at the Utah law again, because it says the practice of professional engineering does not include the practice of architecture as defined in whatever section it is, but a licensed professional engineer may perform architecture work as is incidental to the practice of engineering.
As is incidental. Okay. To the practice of. Okay.
And the Utah code is 58-22-102. Because there's some language in there that you are talking about that may help.
Okay. Can you send that to me? Roxana, can you send that to me?
We actually have a memo and has all 50, has the NCEES model law and all 50 states.
Oh, so it's in there in the Utah definition? Okay. I thought you were calling out something else. Okay. I got you. Yeah, I got that. All righty. With regard to page 1 of the engineering definition that I sent out, if you go to the bottom of page 1, I think that we should strike the introductory paragraph for the Texas law, which begins the practice of engineering means, because we've already said all of that stuff previously under when we've plagiarized, if you will, the Florida stuff. So that eliminates some, if you will, some of the verbiage. Are y'all okay with that? I don't think there's anything in that particular short paragraph, it's 4 sentences, that isn't addressed somewhere else.
So your proposal is to sort of mesh, in general, Florida and Texas, or are you looking at them individually?
Yes, I'm trying to. I tried to use both of them so that we could grab everything we liked, and then eliminate anything that was a duplicate, and then add to it with anything we felt was missing.
Mm-hmm.
And since they were both started with the same stuff that the NCWS model law is, I felt like they were, good starting points anyway. And I like I said, I like the fact that there was 2 different formats. So one's bulleted and one is just a narrative. So we can continue to massage these, but if we can use this as kind of like, this was the starting point, and then we moved to version 2, and then next Wednesday I hope we move to version 3, and then I'll be meeting with the definition committee and see what they have, and I can share with them some of our conceptual thoughts. And then by the time we have the next board meeting, it's going to be October. I hope we'll have another one of these kind of conversations in the interim, and then by October be getting down to the point where we feel really good at it. And Stuart's had a chance to run it through all of his legal reviews that he can to help us, really start tightening things up and get to the point by the end of October that we have something that, we at least like.
Along the same lines, could you?
But it's,
in the Florida section, along the same lines, in the Florida section, could we not remove the paragraph that starts similarly, engineering survey includes, because of what we added?
That was my next one. I was going to ask about that too, because we're going to take that. Yeah. Okay. So we can take that out. Yep. And I was going to take the paragraph above that, the design coordination, and try to turn that into a number. So that could be added. I was getting ready
to suggest the same thing. Yeah, I like that.
Okay, good. Okay. And then the paragraph above that, we said we kind of liked it. It refers to the 3-legged stool. The paragraph above that is the one that Stuart's going to review for conflicts with regard to being defined somewhere else. And then the paragraph above, the 2 paragraphs above that are more of the introductory paragraphs.
Right.
And they're kind of good.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm happy for us to wordsmith them some more, but they're pretty good.
Yeah.
Because it kind of helps define
what
much, services and work is.
That's pretty much what's in the NCAAS model law definition too.
That's right. Well, I think we've made a lot of progress.
Okay.
Right.
I think one of the things that we need to think about, excuse me, one of the things we still need to think about is if instead of just editing what we have at hand, are there other things that are not addressed here that would be additive that we need to put into the list? So I would suggest, we've been at this for almost an hour and a half, so we can quit here shortly. But for next Wednesday, is there anything further to additive that we want to put to the list? Excuse me. And if you know it right now, that's fine. You can tell me.
Look, I'll ask a question, and I don't have anything off the top of my mind, but does anybody know what do we typically have trouble with as far as defining? What have been our cases in front of us where we've had questions about whether that is? I can't think of one off the top of my head, but maybe somebody else does. Studies, and those study things are the ones that ring a bell to me.
That might be a good research question to ask of Roxana and the.
Have we had any discipline cases where we said that's not engineering or things that
non-registrants who are practicing engineering? I think that's probably a question for Roxana's group is, can you provide the research on case histories for complaints brought against non-registrants for practicing engineering.
I think the closest we've got is what we've seen with the interior design that Susan, someone came to Susan on. So we did with interior design, someone not licensed practicing it by definition, but I can't think of any with engineering. So I'll talk to Stuart and see how we would go through the data and the complaints to search for those words. And it shouldn't be that hard. None for engineering jump at me, but I know that was one of the latest reasons when we said, see, if we had definitions, we'd avoid this. But it had to do with interior design.
Okay, well, let's look and see if we
Yep.
can do a review of case histories for the past 10 years on anybody that might have come before the board because they were accused of practicing engineering and they weren't a registrant.
Tell Frances we need her to do it. We need it by Monday morning sharp. And let me know how that goes.
I will. I'll do that.
I bet you I can tell you how that goes right now. All right. Well, this has been really, really, really good. I hope that you guys feel good about it. I'm going to go through all of what we've discussed and try to provide a version 2, a 2.0 on this, and probably write some notes too, just to try to capture some of the conversation that we've had. So again, so that we try to remember why we made certain decisions. And any of you who have notes, if you want to share them via Roxana, I suppose that's helpful to me too. And then I'll get this together for Wednesday. I don't think there's no need to distribute it for Wednesday. We're not going to do anything anyway, and that's really the proper course of action. So I'll have it for the Wednesday Engineering Committee meeting. Does that sound good?
Kathy, if you want me to print them out before the meeting, email them to me sometime late Thursday or Tuesday. I'll be in very early. If you change your mind and want them on the iPads, then I would need them, unfortunately, Tuesday by noon. But otherwise, because they'll be loaded. But I can print papers late Tuesday or early Wednesday when I come in, definitely for the engineering committee to have. And then you decide what you want the full definition committee for the afternoon of Wednesday to have.
Okay, I'll try to do that. I'm sure I can get it. I'll probably get it done on Monday. So. All righty. Well, sounds good. Any closing comments before we hang up?
It's a good call.
Very good.
Well, thank you all. It was great. I will close those off the record. And keep in mind, as far as minutes, that these won't be posted today, but I think in the next 2 to 3 days, and the one that we did in February. So you've got the audio, and the audio is nice because you can fast forward even, just to recall who said what or what are we leaving out if that happens to be the case.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. I will turn us off the record, and I think all you need to do is hang up, and we're good, and I'll see everyone next Wednesday.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.